So we're doing the story of Jonah this morning, and I think it's safe to assume we all heard this story at a pretty young age. I think most of us got introduced to this story through VBS. Y'all remember this, right? Some people? Hopefully, if you're above the age of 18, I don't know if we've done it recently, but this is what you grew up with. A big smiling whale. And it's a big trash bag, and you would go and you would have this sitting in the back the whole time, and then the last day you got to go inside the fish, and then you got to meet Jonah, and it was a whole thing. But it was super cool as a kid. When I was reading to Otto, my oldest, going through the Bible, we did his action Bible, and they took a bit of a different interpretation on Jonah. I don't know if you can see this, but you got him just inside the mouth, and you got the fangs coming over him, and it looks monstrous. I think when we grew up, we as in maybe the majority of us, looking at picture Bibles, the interpretation of the fish was a little bit different. A little bit more happy-go-lucky. Not terrifying at all. And I think maybe we miss the point when we do this, when we make it a giant, fat, smiley, happy whale. I think maybe it should be a bit more terrifying, something like that. Hopefully you can see all these. That one. Yeah, I mean, we don't know what kind of fish it was, just, a giant fish. I think if we do VBS in the future, we should make the fish as absolutely terrifying as possible. Because, number one, the kids would freak out and say, that's so cool. Even reading to Otto from the Action Bible, I had never seen a darker picture of this fish before until this guy from Marvel drew out the Action Bible, and this is kind of neat, but this gets across the point of the story, that this is something that's terrifying. So I think in the future, if we do VBS, this fish should be what we do. Fangs and everything. Okay. All jokes aside, I want to walk through Jonah this morning because it's kind of a peculiar book, not just in its content, but with how the book ends. Because it doesn't even end on a cliffhanger. It just drops off. So I want to walk through this morning and maybe see if we can get at what some of the points were that the original hearers might have gotten. The surprising thing about this story is that God picks a prophet from a very unlikely place to go and speak to a very evil group of people. Now, when I say an unlikely place, Jonah is pulled from what is called the northern kingdom. So give me a second to just paint you this historical picture. Y'all know who King David was, right? Okay, I don't need to explain that part. So David has a son named Solomon. After Solomon is king in Israel, Israel gets split. You have the northern kingdom and you have the southern kingdom. Well, they both kind of go on down their own road, but each road leads away from God. And God spends a lot of time talking to the northern kingdom and telling them, you guys got to get your act together. And they don't want to listen. And by about 720-ish BC, a world superpower by the name of Assyria comes in and they completely not wipe out, but they do a number on this northern kingdom. They beat them, they take them captive, all the while the southern kingdom gets to watch in horror. Okay. God pulls Jonah from the northern kingdom and he says, I want you to go talk to Assyria. And I want you to preach to them and call out what they're doing because they're acting against me. Now, all this is happening before Assyria comes in and takes over the northern kingdom, even though nobody knows that's going to happen yet. All right. So Jonah has to go in and talk to this horrid group of people. Now, some people would reason that Assyria is the absolute worst nation in the history of the world. One writer has said its atrocities were as proverbial as the records and art left by its kings make clear. Though it could conquer the world, it proved unable to rule the world. Its victims lay face down under its tyranny, but no national spirit breathed in its corpus. In other words, there was no pride as a nation. They were just rotten and vicious people. They saw other men and nations as tools to be exploited and gratify the lusts of conquest and commercialism. It existed to render absolutely no service to mankind, not even to their own people. This is a place you don't want to be. And in this time, I imagine everybody thought the best thing that could happen to Assyria would be if they just die, or if a bomb went off, if they had bombs back then. But nothing good should happen to these people. And yet, God calls Jonah to go and preach and to call out the evil that Assyria is doing. I want to read to you from Jonah chapter 1. The word of the Lord came to Jonah, the son of Amittai. Go to the great city of Nineveh and preach against it, because its wickedness has come up before me. But Jonah ran away from the Lord and headed for Tarshish. He went down to Joppa, where he found a ship bound for that port. And after paying the fare, he went aboard and sailed for Tarshish to run away from God. And the Lord sent a great wind on the sea, and such a violent storm arose that the ship threatened to break up. And all the sailors were afraid, and each one cried out to his own God. And they threw the cargo into the sea to lighten the ship. But Jonah had gone below deck, where he lay down and fell into a deep sleep. And the captain went to him and said, "What are you doing? How can you sleep? Get up, call on your God. Maybe he'll take some notice of us. Maybe we won't all die." And then the sailors said to each other, "All right, let's cast lots to find out who is responsible for this calamity." And they cast lots, and the lot fell on Jonah. So they asked him, "Okay, who are you? Who is responsible for making all this trouble for us? What did you do? Where do you come from? Who are your people?" And Jonah answered, "I'm a Hebrew, and I worship the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the land." And this terrified the ship. And they asked, "What have you done?" Because they knew that he ran away because Jonah had already told them. And the sea was getting rougher and rougher, and they asked him, "What are we supposed to do to make the sea calm down?" Jonah said, "Pick me up and throw me into the sea, and it'll become calm. I know that this is my fault, and that this great storm has come upon you." Instead, the men did their best to row back to land, but they couldn't, for the sea had grown even wilder than before. And then they cried to the Lord, "Oh God, please do not let us die for taking this man's life. Don't hold us accountable for killing an innocent man, for you, O Lord, have done as you pleased." And they took Jonah and they tossed him overboard, and the raging sea became calm. And at this, the men greatly feared the Lord, and they offered a sacrifice to the Lord, and they made vows to him. But the Lord provided a great fish to swallow Jonah, and Jonah was inside that fish for 3 days and 3 nights. Okay, so Jonah felt like he could actually run away from God. And this isn't surprising, given how people thought about gods of that time. Now, he's in the northern kingdom. There's a lot of idolatry going on there. And sometimes people thought that gods are kind of localized. So, if you have a god of the mountains in your area and he's, ticking you off, you can go somewhere else. And you can get away from the god of the mountains. Go somewhere where there are no mountains. Jonah learns 2 things. Number 1, God is not localized. And number 2, running away from God is very costly. Did you notice that part about Jonah having to pay for his own trip? And he gets this massive boat. From what we know, this is a huge ship. He pays his own money. We don't know exactly how many stops are along this giant ship that he's going to go on, but he pays the money. And we as the reader know that at this point it's all downhill from here. By running away from God, Jonah places himself in a situation that only God is going to be able to rescue him from. And during the storm, the workers on the boat say, "Hey man, you got to pray to your God, but maybe he'll do something for us." The text does not indicate that Jonah prayed. Maybe he did, but it doesn't say that he did. Why not? He prays in chapter 2. Why wouldn't you pray here when they ask you to? It's easy to speculate. Maybe Jonah thought he was done for, and there was no need to pray. But to me, that doesn't line up with the story. I kind of think Jonah thought he could get out of it. I think maybe if we just keep going, maybe the storm will calm down. I wonder if when he suggested that you throw me over, if he really thought they would do it. Anybody ever gone out to eat and the bill comes and then you offer to pay for it, but you really don't want to, but you know the person's going to say it. You just want to be nice. So you say, "Hey, I got it. Anybody ever do that? Nobody? I'm the only one who does that. I just like to seem like I'm going to pay for it sometimes. And then they don't get it, and then you're stuck paying for it. I think that's what, maybe, I'm just guessing. Maybe Jonah does that here. Yeah, just throw me over. Okay. But they wait. They give him an option, but nothing calms down. And so finally they take Jonah, they pray to God, "Forgive us for what we're doing," and they throw him over. And the sea grows calm. Now this to me would be a great comedic scene, because here you have Jonah in the water. Water's calmed down, and the guys are now arguing, should we take him back up? He is cursed. And then this fish just comes up and grabs him. And then you have chapter 2 with Jonah stuck inside this fish. Jonah is so consumed with trying to avoid God that he can't see the dangers in front of him. Why in the world would you let people throw you over? But he does. And I think maybe if he thought, if you throw me over and I can get to land, maybe I can get out of this. Maybe that's why he doesn't pray. And I think God is saying, I'm not done yet. And by this fish swallowing Jonah, Jonah now has to sit inside and he begins to pray. And we don't know exactly, we have written down obviously later, he didn't write this prayer inside the fish, but this is what Jonah remembers of himself praying. He has a call to the Lord, he has a call for help. There is an admission that what has happened to him is what he deserves, and it is prayed in great distress. Did anybody ever see the movie The Meg? The Meg? No? Okay. Wow. Well, this joke is lost on y'all then. There is a book also in a movie called The Meg. It's just about a huge fish, but there's a great section in the book where it talks about what it might be like inside a huge fish. Things I never thought about. You have to consider, number one, the stench, but also the pressure inside where you are, and also the lack of oxygen. And this contributes to people thinking that this story did not actually happen. If we believe in a God that could create the world, I think God could find a way to allow a fish to swallow a man for 3 days. But Jonah prays, God hears his prayer. Jonah says, when my life was ebbing away, I remembered you, Lord, and my prayer rose to you in your holy temple. Jonah knows that salvation can only come through the one that he is trying to ignore, and God allows it, and the fish vomits him back up. That's got to be a great experience. Back onto land, and then God tries again. And here we have chapter 3. God says, okay, round 2. I need you to go to Nineveh, and I need you to preach against these people for me. And this time, Jonah goes, and he gives the message. And it's a short one. 40 more days, and Nineveh is going to be overturned. He does not say, if you believe in the Lord, you are going to be saved, and you are going to be his people, and you're going to be with him. All he says is, you have 40 days, and if you don't turn this around, God's going to destroy you. Doesn't say how much longer you're going to have. It's just, at this point, an opportunity for grace. And Jonah has success. He must have been a great speaker because they believe him. Think of all the prophets who came to the northern kingdom of Israel with the message of God, and the people of Israel abused those prophets, and now Jonah goes to the worst nation possible, and they accept this short message. It is at this point that the story takes a very interesting turn. You could have ended the book right here, because Jonah has preached, the people have said, we're sorry. The president goes out and says, we are going to now stop eating and drinking. We are going to put on sackcloth. We're going to change our entire life because we fear the Lord and we want to appease the Lord your God. And God allows that to happen. And that would have been a great ending. Except Jonah is not happy. And we discover why Jonah thought that God might be listening to him in the belly of the whale. And we discover in this part why Jonah didn't want to go in the first place. God says, why are you so upset? And Jonah says, this is why I wanted to stay at home. This is why I didn't want to come out here. This is why I tried to leave to Tarshish, because I knew that you were a gracious and compassionate God, that you were slow to anger and abounding in love. I picture Jonah just sitting in his hotel room with a TV remote in his hand, just sulking, staring at the screen, talking to God. I knew that this is who you were. You are too compassionate. And I knew that you were going to save these people. And you know what? I didn't want you to. They don't deserve to be saved. And God says, are you really that upset? Jonah says, yeah. You know how upset I am? I would rather you kill me than keep on living with them. And God says, what right do you have to be upset? And Jonah just gets out, grabs his keys, and storms out of the hotel room. And he goes and sits on this chair or sits underneath a tree or sits outside to watch what's going to happen to this city. And God, in his mercy, causes this vine to grow up and to give Jonah shade. But the next day, God sends a worm to kill that vine, and the sun starts beating down on Jonah's head, and he becomes depressed, becomes anxious and furious because he's so hot and he grows faint. And now the second time, Jonah declares, you know what? It would be better if I just died. This is miserable. And God says again, why are you so mad about this vine that died? And Jonah says, I have plenty of right to be angry about this vine. I am so mad that I could die. It's a wonder here that God doesn't just pull the princess bride and say, as you wish. Fine. You keep complaining about wanting to die. Let's just do it. That's all you do is complain. Instead, God in his mercy says, Jonah, I don't know why you're so upset, man. You didn't make this vine. You didn't cause it to grow. You didn't tend to it. It came up overnight, and it died overnight. Is it the vine that you care about, or is it the shade that you care about? If you can fall in love with a vine, with a gourd, why can't I fall in love with 120,000 people over there? Now, the 120,000 people, we don't know exactly who that is. I think maybe that's the nation of Nineveh. You have a people who are so, they're not morally innocent, but they are so ethically naive. And they've already shown sensitivity to their evil ways because they admitted that they were doing wrong. God offers a choice of pure grace to Nineveh, of people who had never known any other course than sin. And the only way out is God. And the book ends like that. God has a clear contrast between the ways of Jonah. There is a clear contrast between the ways of Jonah and the ways of God in this story. By the 2nd century, Christians are getting a lot of attention. Not great attention either. So people are reading their books, and they're reading books like Jonah, and these books don't make a lot of sense to them. One ancient writer says, what are we supposed to think about Jonah, who is said to have been in a whale or in a giant fish for 3 days? It's impossible that a man could be swallowed up with his clothing inside of a fish. Furthermore, what's the reason for the story? I think questions like that maybe miss the point. Jonah knew God's will, and he refused to do it, and he suffered for it. The Assyrians did not know God's will. They were in danger of suffering, but they acknowledged their sin, and Jonah would have denied them forgiveness. If God is willing to extend his grace to those who are unworthy of being his people, wouldn't he extend his mercy to his own people if they would just do what he's asking Nineveh to do and repent? Just turn back to him. This book is not written to Nineveh. It is written to the Jews of this time. So if he's willing to give grace to them, what's Israel's excuse? It's likely what Israel is taking away from this. So what's our message? We often appreciate that God is gracious when we want the grace. We are not so easily inclined to offer that grace to others, particularly towards people that we don't like. There is a great line in Jonah chapter 2, verse 8. Those who cling to worthless idols forfeit the grace that could be theirs. Jonah knows that. And he knows that the Assyrians have now decided to cling to God, and yet he doesn't want to offer the grace that God wishes to give. If God seeks the welfare of others, even those that we hate, even those people who deserve to be hated, if God seeks the welfare of those people, how does that line up with our behavior? How does that line up with how we view those people? If God is willing to accept the repentance of those who do him wrong, maybe we could think about how we react when people do us wrong. Talk about showing God to your neighbor, right? Love God, love your neighbor, preach the gospel. I can't think of a better way to do that than by grace. So when people hear you talking, when people hear how you respond, when people see what you post, are they seeing an echo of the God that you claim to worship? Are they hearing the God that you claim to worship? Is grace in your voice? Is it in your behavior? Or are they hearing Jonah? Are they hearing somebody who says God is gracious, but you ain't getting grace from me? Something to think about. Let's all stand and sing.